This is Andrea Kolsky, and you're listening to Justice is Blonde on Lone Star Community Radio, and we're super excited today to be joined by very special guests all the way from Austin area. We have one of the guests is named Austin, from the Austin area, but we have Austin Berry and Peter Pirano from the Last Resort Recovery, or Last Resort. They are here to help us figure out and discuss rehab, being addicted, drugs, opioids, and all kinds of other fun stuff you were prepared to hear about when you woke up today on this rainy Conroe day. So we're really happy to have you guys.
Thanks for having us. We're happy to be here.
So Peter, you have a really interesting story, and I understand you're the executive director of this facility here, Last Resort. How long have you guys been in business?
So Last Resort has been around for about 6 years. I've been with the company for 2.5.
So it's a really great title because the last resort is really when you're at your last resort. Am I correct?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's a great play on words, right? For a lot of our clients, patients, the guys who come to see us, it is really their last chance, their last shot at life, their last shot at success, all those kind of things. So, yeah.
So, and we are also joined by one of the VIPs in your operation. He helps with advertising, marketing, visit development, Austin Berry. That's the other Austin that I promised. And you've been there for how long, Austin?
Since we opened.
Okay, so you've been there all 6 years.
Yeah, I've been there since 2012. I started as an entry-level tech. We're a family-owned business by Bill and Ann Schneider, and I've gotten to know them really well over the years, and they're just amazing people, and they've coached me along the way, and Bill's one of my mentors, and, they've been doing this for over about 25 years. They started a center in 1993 called the Life Healing Center. So they have plenty of experience, so we're not completely the new kids on the block. So we know what we're doing, and we know we had a goal and a vision of being something different for men out there.
And that's interesting that you say that, because as Justice is Blonde host, I'm a lady lawyer, I'm a soldier for women, but you guys don't let women into your club. Am I right?
No. I mean, we have plenty of females who work with us, but we do not take female patients, no ma'am.
And that is, why is that? Is that by design? Women are too distracting?
Well, I think that...
and wonderful?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that for a lot of men, women are distracting, and for a lot of women, men are distracting. So it's not... men is just a population that we chose to treat, and we believe that treatment works best in gender-specific settings, meaning that women with the women, men with the men.
And the jails actually believe that too.
Yes, they do.
As far as isolation and controlling behavior. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about you is that you grew up in New York. So, I mean, that's interesting, just Texan by convert, as I am myself.
Sure. I like freedom, so I came to Texas.
Well, we're very pro a lot of good rights down here in America. But one of the other things I think is really interesting about you is you started your life kind of on the life in the fast lane for sure.
Yeah.
And you were in the nightclub industry. Am I right? What
Yep.
was that? And you opened up a nightclub with your little brother or older brother?
Older brother, yeah. Several. We opened up a lot of nightclubs, yes.
And basically what happened is he came into kind of a financial boon due to something that was, probably addiction related for the person that kind of started the
Absolutely, yeah.
the snowball.
He got hit head on by a drunk driver. Thank God he lived, but he definitely had some damage to his face. And he got a real small settlement out of that, and decided that he was going to invest in a nightclub. Not sure why he chose that. He had been working in the nightclub scene prior, but always wanted to be his own boss. So I was 16 when that happened, and I had been working in a pizzeria, and they needed somebody to run the kitchen at the nightclub, and so that's how I ended up going on. I ran the kitchen at the nightclub.
So you were working at a pizza place. Is it in Long Island?
Yeah.
Okay. And then your brother said, "Hey, let's go open up."
Yeah.
What was the name of the club?
The first club was called the Foggy Goggle.
Okay.
In Hampton Bays. And so my brother, being my older brother, just wanted to take care of me and saw a business opportunity and saw a way that he could keep me kind of by his side and watch after me. And so he brought me into the club scene and let me run the kitchen. Didn't really think that I would do much in the kitchen. And at the end of that summer, I had accumulated a good bit of money from that kitchen, which shocked everybody, and became his partner moving
So when you say you didn't think you'd do much from the kitchen as far as
Revenue.
generate that much money,
Right.
and then you were just came up with some great recipes, you were
I mean,
crushing it.
I was slanging chicken fingers and mozzarella sticks, but I think they underestimated how hard I was going to work in that position. And so, I went out and bought the food every day myself. My parents helped me because they had like a Sam's Club card. And so we go to Sam's Club every day, buy the food, come back, and I would go there every night and make the food and sell it to the inebriated
Right,
clientele.
drunk patrons.
Yeah.
Perfect market.
Yeah, it was great. I had them locked in, So as the night went on, the prices went up, supply and demand, and I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun, but eventually that lifestyle kind of got the best of me.
So basically, you're have the right vision for your life, but the money, and then soon enough you're going to be on some sort of alcohol and drugs. Is that naturally part of the course?
Well,
Sex,
yeah.
drugs, and rock and roll.
Right. Yes, all of those things. So yeah, for me, I had been smoking marijuana, which I continued to do for quite some time, and I was drinking now that I was in the nightclub scene.
So let me stop you. I want to ask you this because I think a lot of young people think, well, marijuana is no big deal, or and there certainly is a camp that say marijuana is a gateway drug. And with so much of the country legalizing marijuana, what
Sure.
what do you think about that? I mean, obviously, for your industry, you want people clean off of everything. But
Correct.
what do you think about marijuana specifically?
I think that for me, marijuana was a gateway drug. Now, is it scientifically a gateway drug? I mean, I know plenty of people who smoke pot after work instead of drinking a whiskey and seem to do fine. But for your real drug addict or alcoholic, marijuana, in my opinion, is not a good maintenance solution. There are some centers out there that use marijuana to treat opioid addiction, for example. In my mind, that's harm reduction, which is great. It saves lives. It stops people from dying. But they're never going to get the chance to experience what sobriety is. They'll never be sober. Do I think that legalizing marijuana is going to lead to more abuse? Probably. I think we've seen some of that already. I mean, it does generate quite a bit of tax revenue for the states who have legalized it. I would like to see that tax revenue, though, put into treatment programs. Just like I'd love to see some heavy taxes on alcohol put into treatment programs.
Well, you've brought up a couple of really good points as far as legalizing marijuana. This is something that's come up before on our show. But my feeling as a criminal defense attorney is that it will stop police from actually finding other illegal drugs because the smell of marijuana gets
Sure.
you a free search of somebody's automobile,
Sure.
their person.
Sure.
And so if you say marijuana is now legal and you pull someone over and they may be involved in some other nefarious criminal activity, the police may never find out about it. They may never know they have an ounce of cocaine in their glove box because they have no other reason to get there. So
True.
it probably would hurt my industry as well.
Sure.
And, ultimately, I think that I also am opposed to legalizing marijuana because I think that young people, if something like that is legal, it's going to be easier for them to have access to, and it's going to, slow down their, desire to be on Shark Tank if they're
Yeah.
sitting at home
Yeah.
getting high and playing Call of Duty.
And so I think that's the important part, especially when talking to adolescents and youth, is that, we just say no does not work. I did just say no in school, and then I did a lot of cocaine.
Right.
The DARE programs don't seem to generally work. And I think the whole scared straight thing doesn't work with our youth. I think it's important to just be open and honest with them and just have a conversation. Marijuana may not kill you. You're probably not going to smoke it the first time and be a drug addict. But it will take away some of your ambitions. If you wanted to be a professional ball player, probably not going to do that smoking pot every day.
I mean, we saw what happened to some of our favorite athletes from Texas, Ricky
Yeah.
Williams.
Yeah,
He had great aspirations and potential,
sure,
and it didn't work out for him.
Yeah.
Because he had that dependency,
sure.
and maybe he thought it made him a better ball player, but
Sure.
at the end of the day, it really did end up hurting him and
Right. And
lower his aspirations.
I think there's a fine line to walk too. I see plenty of high school athletes who sprain their ankle and the doctor puts them on OxyContin so they can play the next game. I think that does more damage than smoking a joint. Me personally, that's my opinion.
And I think that, you had said, and I don't know if we had said this on air already because it's early, so we might have had this conversation outside of, but your rehab may not be for everybody, but it is certainly for certain kinds of people. So if someone is addicted to marijuana, and they want to try to become unaddicted to marijuana, you may not be the right facility for them. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it depends on how that marijuana is affecting their life, right?
Okay.
So if they're addicted to marijuana and they've gotten one traffic ticket and, they don't really feel good about it, do they need treatment? Possibly. Are we the right treatment center for them? Probably not. If they're smoking marijuana, they've been arrested 17 times, they continue to lose jobs, they've dropped out of school, their girlfriends have left them, parents are frustrated. We may be a better fit for that client then. I mean, we're a fit for folks who are drug addicts and alcoholics. We're not a fit for folks who are social drinkers. That's just not our clientele.
So back to your story, you kind of start down the drug
Yeah.
and fun path, and
Very fun, yeah.
and at some point you realize this isn't the best thing that
Yeah,
is working for my lifestyle.
Right. So I went from being a very happy young man in my take on it. My brother helped me become wildly successful. We made a lot of money.
And also wild.
Yeah, very, very wild, although he did several times try and tame me. My brother was very different than me. He could just stop drinking. That was not my experience. And he would talk with me and say, hey, you can have fun, but this other stuff has got to stop. Have a beer, smoke a joint. Don't do the other stuff. And I would look at him and say yes, and then do all the other stuff. I was a guy who, the first time I did cocaine, I looked at my friends and said, if I continue to do that, I will be addicted to it. And they were like, no, you're fine. And I was like, okay, give me the bag, and continue to do it. And so for me, it spiraled pretty quickly to the point where I still had money. I had a brand new BMW, had apartments in different states, and I absolutely hated myself, hated my life, loathed myself, couldn't look at myself in the mirror, was disgusted with everything that I had become, overwhelming feelings of loneliness and just self-hatred, and so that was the breaking point for me internally. The breaking point for my family was, I was doing drugs, and my family wasn't going to put up with that.
Well, we do need to take a break to hear from our sponsors.
Sure.
And we're not taking a break from your exciting story. We'll be back to hear more about your road to recovery, the last resort, and some other issues that our country's dealing with from a crisis standpoint. This is Justice is Blonde.
Don't forget to download the Lone Star Community Radio app for your Google Play or Apple Store. Bring Montgomery County's community radio with you anywhere with your smartphone or tablet. If you are in the Conroe area, tune in on FM. That is Conroe's FM 104.5, 106.1.
Hey guys, this is Connor.
This is Dick.
This is Chris.
And we're with the Ticket Stub Podcast every Thursday live at noon on 104.5 and 106.1 FM in the Conroe area. Also, anytime at irlonestar.com. You go to irlonestar.com/TTS. You can find all of our social media.
And don't forget, we give away 2 tickets to the Grand Theater on every show.
If you like movies and you like complaining or celebrating anything that has to do with the silver screen, check out the Ticket Stub Podcast and join us every Thursday at noon o'clock on Lone Star Community Radio.
This is Andrea Kolsky. You're listening to Justice is Blonde on Lone Star Community Radio. And today, what is it, Dick? February 23rd? 2nd? Wow, man, I'm rocking and rolling through this week. February 21st. And we're joined by very special guests from Austin area. North Austin, South Austin, West Austin.
East Austin.
East Austin. Wow, the last one I had left.
Smithville, Texas, to be
Smithville,
exact.
Texas. And we're joined by special guests Austin Berry and Peter Pirano. He's Italian, in case you're listening at home. And they run and participate in and facilitate this wonderful rehab facility, the Last Resort outside of Austin. So besides your facility in Austin, what else is there to do in Smithville?
So I actually bought a home in Smithville. I
Okay.
love it there.
So people could visit you.
They could. It's a very it's a small town living with close proximity to Austin. We also have a intensive outpatient counseling office there, so you could also
Okay,
get
so you
some-
could get more
You can
counseling.
get more counseling. Yeah, it's a great little community. Got some great.
What's the population, Peter?
I think it's like 1,100 people or something like that.
1,100.
But we just approved a new $10 million football stadium, so that's coming.
So there's going to be a cool football place.
Friday Night Lights.
Yeah.
Friday Night Lights. in
But
Smithville.
you know, Peter's from New York, Long Island, and like I've known him now for about 3 years, and I can't even imagine him in New York anymore. I mean,
Sure.
outside he's got his Dodge Ram pickup truck. He wears cowboy boots.
Yeah.
He lives in Smithville.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
I mean,
Living the dream.
I have a saying, which is if you're not from, I think I stole it from a bumper sticker.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not from Texas, it's not your fault. You got here as soon as you could.
That's true.
And
That is true.
I was telling you, Peter, that I originally am also from upstate New York. So I am here because I hate winter and because I love Texas people. I think they're fantastic.
Yeah.
And I also like the shortened winters.
Yeah, I appreciate that if I accidentally cut somebody off here, if I make a mistake while driving.
You're going to live.
Well, usually they just wave, and they'll kind of give me a look. In New York, there was a lot of screaming and middle fingers, and cuss words had to be exchanged.
It was like a rite of passage.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of, you had to do that, to make the day go by. So.
Well, so before the break, we were talking about kind of your transition from nightclub owner to executive director of rehab facility from
Sure.
rocking and rolling in New York to kind of taking it easy in Texas
Yeah.
and running a rehab.
Yeah.
And one of the things, I'm very pro Texas, and one of the things that I know is great about Texas is that we have a lot of rehab facilities. Now, obviously, for fellas, we would say that yours is the best,
Yes, ma'am.
which is the last resort in Smithville. But it is a state and an area where you guys are at that seems to have a lot of opportunities to people that are dealing with addiction. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, so the great thing about the Texas in general is that it's easy to do business here. So, folks, it's easier to help people get the help they need in Texas as opposed to other states. The Austin area specifically, for everything that Austin is or isn't, they tend to be more open-minded and kind of embrace the recovery community, which is a great plus for us. Where we can have a facility that's remote enough in the country, but still close enough to Austin. And yeah, the Austin community tends to really welcome people looking to better their lives into that community. So it's good.
Yeah, and also as someone who grew up in New York, one of the things that I know that you've met with up there is when you first had your issues with addiction and you decided that you wanted to get help, it was trying to find a therapeutic community that kind of met your needs.
Yeah.
And I know you struggled with that.
I did, yeah. So, really what saved my life in New York was a couple things. One, I had a strong family who wasn't going to allow what I was doing to continue, and whether that meant that they were going to love me back to health or cut me off completely, they were willing to do whatever it took. So there was that.
Did they do both?
They loved me and cut me off at the same time.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
right.
And so my parents are, the greatest people that I've ever met, like a lot of us.
Mine are also.
Right,
So
exactly.
that we would have to compete.
Sure. And so, when it kind of came to a head, my parents did everything they could, that they made sure that I did not have access to funds. My dad took the license plates off my car. Not my license plates, but
Right.
he took the license plates off. And the
He
whole,
made sure you weren't street legal.
right, the family intervened on me and took away my access to going back out there and killing myself.
Had you met any legal obstacles before that? Had you been arrested, jailed, convicted of anything?
Yeah, I was arrested so I only have one real major arrest, which is sealed, but I'll talk to you about it.
Okay.
Anyway. When I was 16, I was driving in a car with some of my friends. I was the passenger, and I threw some fireworks out of the window.
Okay.
And I was just playing around. I was a kid.
Right.
And I didn't see the police car there.
Did you get charged with littering?
Throwing explosives at oncoming vehicles.
Oh, okay.
is what I
Yeah,
got charged with.
certainly worse than
And
littering.
so the firework was a fountain, a big fountain sparkler, and
Okay.
it landed on the hood of the police car that was parked in the woods and
Okay.
shot sparks all over the car and her, the police officer, and she came out of the car, kind of putting the fire out on her vest and taking me to jail. Rightfully so.
Right,
I mean,
that's the time.
I completely
Right,
deserve that.
right.
Although I honestly did not see the police car. But yeah, I had some legal consequences. I had a lot of close calls. To be honest with you, that I don't know if it's God or luck. I got pulled over one time with multiple ounces of cocaine in the car and a gun and a loaded gun in New York. So all said and done, I probably had about 14 life sentences on me,
Right.
New York time, and somehow walked away from that. Whether that's God, luck, privilege, whatever we want to call it.
A good Tuesday.
A great Tuesday, which was, one of the wake-up calls for me was, if I was lucky enough or blessed enough to not end up in jail for the rest of my life, I probably should try doing something with it.
And maybe try to pay it forward, give it back, share
Yeah.
some of your experiences.
Yeah, so I had a really great therapist, this guy, Dr. Cardaris, and I walked into his office and told him that I was bipolar, and he kind of laughed at me and was like, "Son, you do cocaine, and you go up and you come down,
Right.
and you're not bipolar, you're a drug addict."
Right.
And so he told it to me straight, and told me that I needed to go to 12-step meetings and to get my life back on track and to stop being such a schmuck, was kind of the words
Right,
he used, excuse
right.
my language. And I listened for whatever reason. He was a great mentor to me and still is today. And so I had great people in my life. I had the right people at the right time, and I had the opportunity to access those people. What was hard, like you mentioned, was New York has limited treatment options, and the treatment options that they have, in my opinion, has not kept up with the national
The
standards.
demand.
Well, not only the demand, but the national standards. So the treatment that we provide at the last resort is, hands down 100 times better than the treatment that I received in New York. Now, I got the message. I got the message that I needed to stay sober. I ended up going to treatment. I was there for about 8 days. My insurance cut off, and they put me out on the street. I was in a rehab with 56 other people. Last time I knew, I was the only one sober from those 56 people. A lot of the guys that were in there with me are dead now from addiction.
Probably
So-
some of them are also incarcerated.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's kind of a byproduct.
Yeah, it's either you get well, you die, or you go to jail. Those are the only options with addiction. And so, I mean, that was one of the things that was disheartening for me about that area. And one of the draws for me to Texas was the fact that there's a lot more opportunity to help people here.
Well, I mean, and this is just my New York experience. I grew up in a small town, and there was major zoning, so much so that we weren't allowed to have a fast food restaurant within 30 miles of the city. So I can
Correct.
imagine that trying to get a rehab facility into an area where they won't allow you to have a McDonald's
Correct.
is difficult
Yeah.
from a New Yorker mentality.
Yeah, I know. On Long Island, there's a place called Seafield, and they, so there's a opioid epidemic nationally.
Absolutely agree, and absolutely want to cover that in this show.
And so the tri-state area, or New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, they're having a lot of young folks die at an alarming rate. And so there was one treatment facility who bought an old abandoned convent and was going to turn it into a treatment facility just for women, 70 beds. And the people in the town put up billboards that said, these women are going to kill your children, rape your children.
Right.
Don't let them build it. And they didn't let them build the facility. And this is a facility that has been operating a center on Long Island for 30 years, has a decent reputation, and was trying to help the community. And the NIMBYism kind of crushed all that. So yeah.
The
it's
not in my
tough.
backyardism.
Right.
I had to figure that
Yes,
out.
ma'am.
So, as far as the opiate addiction,
Mm-hmm.
so that is something we've also discussed on past shows. Is there is, at least here in Texas, there is a little bit of a legislative move to make it harder if you are a opioid consumer, and I'm talking about legal opioids.
Sure.
But I'm Vicodin, things of that nature, which the generic is hydrocodone, or people call it Norco, or oxycodone, or that whole family.
Sure.
For those viewers listening at home. But heroin is also an opiate, right?
Yep.
What are some other opiates that are kind of in the same family?
So I think people often don't understand that OxyContin is just heroin in a pill form.
Legal.
Right. And so you have your basic painkillers, OxyContin. Like you said, Vicodin, Percocet, Percodan, fentanyl. Then something simple as tramadol. Tramadol is an opioid. Suboxone, which helps people get off
Get off heroin.
Right. activates the same receptors as taking an opioid, so you're replacing one for the other. So yeah, it's been interesting to watch this wave kind of sweep the nation. We're starting to see some outrage now. How much action we'll see, I don't know.
Well, I think that part of the problem, and not to be mean-spirited, is that the drug companies make a lot of money, and they have more money than the rehab industry. So
Lots and lots.
when you have the folks with the biggest wallets writing the biggest checks to their
Oh, yeah.
congressmen and senators, they're the ones who are going to have more power to
Yes, ma'am.
to say, well, we can dance around this legislation or what
Yeah.
have you until something actually happens to a member of their family.
Right. So I was talking to some friends the other day, and the part for me that really kind of blew my mind as a nation is where we got to a point where on kind of primetime TV there was a commercial where a construction worker was saying, do you have opioid-induced constipation? Take this other drug.
Right.
And I was sitting there looking at the TV like, this is really where we're at as a nation, that there are
Right.
so many people on opioids, and it's so widely accepted that you need to take another medication so that you're not constipated. from
It's
it.
not
Right.
only it's not only that too. That commercial was ran during the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
The Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So
Right. So that's the kind of pull that
Was it a good commercial at least? Because I didn't see very many good ones this
I
year
mean,
at the Super Bowl. Was
you
it
had-
otherwise entertaining?
if you had opioid-induced constipation, it's
Yeah,
probably,
I love
probably great. But yeah, so I think there was a time where you sprained an ankle, you got opioids. You
For
had your
sure.
teeth out, you got opioids. A lot of doctors have started to educate themselves on the effect of those.
Well, and I think at least I've seen personally folks that I've represented that essentially go to these, what we would call pill mills.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
And you would go to this location to pick up records, and it didn't remotely look like a doctor's office.
Yeah.
It didn't appear that there was a ton of
Treatment.
education or
typically off Highway 6.
other X-ray equipment or things where you're going to have any other type of examination other than just sort of a self-reporting. This is what's happening to me, and can I because of this is what's happening, then this is where I am now.
Yeah.
And they would get prescriptions, and at least due to legislation over the past 5 years or so, they've made it where if you go into a doctor's office or a psychiatrist's office and you try to get certain medications, that's emailed to all the pharmacies. So the
Correct.
doctor has a duty to essentially look at your history before they write that script, and it puts some onus back on the doctors to basically make sure that you're giving somebody medication that's not abusing it.
Right, and yeah, they've created a national database which can help flag a medication so you can't pick up the same medication from 5 different pharmacies in the same month. So there are some steps being taken. We'll
But
see
people
what
are going to
happens.
find it. So, when you do have
Yeah.
the people that can obtain it legally and they can, get it from their insurance for $4
Sure.
and they can get 30 to 60 and they
Yeah.
can sell it for 10,
Yeah.
it's just simply, maybe it's easier for them to do that than get a real paying job.
Yeah, that could be part of it. Yeah, they could be addicted to it themselves and just
Right.
trying to feed their habit. There is still ease of access, like you're saying. I mean, there was a place recently where the gentleman parked a van outside of a strip club, and so you would go to the strip club, you would go into the van, get your MRI.
Okay.
They would prove that you had some back issue with that MRI.
Right.
And you would take it next door to another mobile pharmacy, get your OxyContin, and then you can go into the strip club. So great business model for those folks.
Right.
They made millions and millions and millions of dollars. A lot of people probably died because of it. So there is the ease of access, and when there is a lot of money to be made, obviously there's going to be people who are going to find ways to make it. Our job is to help the folks who are on the other end of it to try and save their lives.
I mean, and certainly what happens in a lot of cases is people don't ever intend to get addicted to it to begin with. For example, they go in, they have their wisdom teeth taken out, or they have a disc issue and they can't afford surgery, or they're afraid that they can't take 2 weeks off of work to have the surgery completed. And so, they originally get 30-day supply, and then they need more just because they've built up a tolerance to the medication.
Correct.
And that's basically a way for them to function in society. But then what ends up happening is sometimes they get behind the wheel. Sometimes they mix that with other things, or just sometimes it really takes its toll, and they either run into legal issues they need to get out of, or they run into personal issues where they say, I don't want to live this way anymore.
Yeah, for a lot of people, what we see is, they're prescribed pills legally, not understanding the full scope of what it is. They may see something start to go wrong as they start to take more than prescribed, but still not fully grasping it. Not until the doctors cut them off or wean them off do they understand that they're addicted. And oftentimes those people end up turning to heroin, which is cheaper and readily available.
And probably has a better feeling for them initially or later down the road.
I would assume I'm not a heroin user. I did use pills and a lot of other drugs, but I didn't use heroin. But it seems that yes, they're able to get the desired feeling quicker. Yes, ma'am.
Well, we do need to take a break to hear from our sponsors, but when we come back, I want to talk about steps to recovery at the last recovery. I also want to talk about, drug tests and things of that nature, ways people try to beat them, and whether you guys test at your facility, and kind of life after the arrest or life after, the decision to change has been initiated. You're listening to Justice is Blonde on Lone Star Community Radio.
Hey, Montgomery County, it's me, C.C. Holmes. And I would personally like to take this time to invite you, that's right, you, to join me every Saturday and Sunday from 3 until 7 p.m., where I will bring you the very best of the smooth jazz, classic jazz, and indeed, yes, the soulful sounds of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So come along and get jazzy with me. That's right, jazzy. Right here, of course, on Conroe's 104.5 and 106.1 FM, or worldwide at irlongstar.com.
Lone Star Community Radio is looking for those who are interested in hosting their own talk show with monthly and weekly slots available on Conroe's FM 104.5 and 106.1 and on irlonestar.com. Start your own podcast, create your first YouTube channel, and be on TV. Contact Lone Star Community Radio online at irlonestar.com or call the station message line at 936-647-3776.
This is Andrea Kolsky, and you're listening to Justice is Blonde on Lone Star Community Radio. And today we're super happy to be joined by Executive Director for Last Resort Recovery in Smithville, Texas, Peter Pirano, and one of his all-stars, Austin Berry, helps with marketing. He's a director of marketing, makes sure everybody's visits are pleasant. Those visits are developed to the maximum of people's enjoyment. Also, just a very all-around pleasant fella, Austin Berry. We're really happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
And before the break, we were talking a lot with Peter about his kind of road to recovery. He had some addiction issues that he confronted head on. Therapy has helped him a little bit. He had a little bit of recovery in New York, but we were kind of talking about how that was a little bit of subpar recovery. But you yourself, did you have issues with addiction you're open to talking about?
Oh yeah, very much so. I've been struggling, or I did struggle with addiction. It started with marijuana too. I mean, you can actually probably go back to alcohol as first. If somebody asked me what my gateway drug was, I would probably say alcohol, because that was the first thing I drank and kind of moved me down the line of other drugs. But I'm a Houston kid. I went to Memorial High School. Had two great, loving parents. Gave me everything I needed, everything I wanted. There was no reason in my life why I should turn to drugs and alcohol. I didn't have any severe trauma. Nothing happened in my childhood that would drive me to using the drugs I used. So it started with cocaine in high school, and then I went off to the University of Alabama. And the first day I was there, my roommate in the dorm, he was a little older than I was. He was like 28 in a freshman dorm.
He was like a seventh year.
Yeah,
senior.
so it couldn't have been good. And he introduced me to this little pill, and it was called OxyContin. And I can remember thinking about it. He got it from a doctor. What's the big deal?
Right.
And it wasn't even like I took it. We snorted it.
Right.
And that just kind of started the spiral where, it was about 2 years of Alabama of just pretty much crashing and burning. And I remember bouncing from my bed to my couch, my bed to my couch, and like thinking I had the flu and thinking I had mono, and going to the doctor and telling him I have mono. I don't know what's going on. But these were all periods. This is how naive I was. These were all periods in between my addiction where I just couldn't buy any more drugs. And I was experiencing withdrawal, but I didn't know what withdrawal was. And so eventually...
Feels a lot like mono, I guess.
Oh yeah, a little bit, probably a lot worse. And eventually, I ended up back in Texas, and I was able to get clean from the pills for a while, and I just drank. And I was able to hold that together for about 7 months or so. And I was telling you before the show, I was working for this hunting club, and I got in a four-wheeler accident, and so I had stitches in my face and in my arm, and they prescribed me Vicodin. Um, and so, I took one pill, and boom, 2 days later, that whole bottle was gone of 30 pills. And I was just back running and gunning again. Eventually, I had some consequences with the law with Harris County. I was arrested for a DWI on my 21st birthday, and I was put on probation. And do you remember the Divert program?
Sure.
Yeah, so I was like number 2 in the Divert program. And so it was a pretty intense program. You had to complete all the outpatient. You had to show up monthly for drug testing.
You had to have an interlock in your car.
Interlock in a camera. So it's, these type of situations, I wanted to bring this up is because it's like instances in my life where a normal person, when they get arrested like this and they get a breathalyzer in their car, and if they fail a drug test or fail a breathalyzer, I was 90 days automatically in jail. A normal person would be like, I can't drink anymore. I shouldn't drink. And I remember telling my lawyer and my dad, we were in the courthouse, and it was Paul Doyle, and I was talking to him, and he was like, well, can you do this? Can you not drink for a year? And I sternly told him I can do this. And I thoroughly believed it.
That day you did.
That day. 2 days later, I was drinking again, and sure enough, it just slowly and gradually got bigger and bigger. And, I was really into pills, and so what I would do is I would, they call it the H-Town cocktail, and it was Vicodin, Xanax, and muscle relaxers. And so I would take those, and about 5 days before I had to go see my PO, I would stop taking them, go through withdrawal, go in there, do a UA, pass the UA, put on the show, put on the front for my probation officer, and make it through the next month. And immediately when I got out of the PO, I'd call my drug dealer up. And this kept on happening month after month until eventually it got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore, where it was the night before my PO, and I was with, I was picking up drugs, I was picking up pills, and my drug dealer at the time knew I had to see my PO the next day, and he was like, what are you doing? And I said, I just can't do it. Like, I couldn't stop. So then I started to kind of wake up. And eventually I was lucky enough that, my brother was in long-term recovery, and he heard through the grapevine that I was struggling, and my dad came in and intervened on me, and it was pretty much either get help or just you're out of the family, and we don't want anything to do with you, and you're cut off. And he kind of brought that tough love I needed at the time, and I moved out to Austin to get sober, and I was fortunate enough to find a great collegiate recovery community at the University of Texas.
Great school, where I went to law school.
Hook 'em. And,
Better than Alabama, no offense.
I don't know about that one. Maybe some things. I don't know about football.
Not at football, just in general.
But I was able to find them, and I found, and the biggest thing we stress to our guys, too, at the last resort is it's just really about the community and the brotherhood. Of course, you got to do the 12 steps and get the clinical help you need, but, if you're not, completely diving in and surrounding the people in your life with everybody who's there to support your recovery, you're going to fail.
Toxic environment.
Exactly. And so that's what I did. I mean, everybody around me was in recovery, and we were all in college-age students, and we had a lot of fun in Austin, which is a great city to get sober in. And we went to shows, we went to ACL, played volleyball, played softball.
Are you everybody's designated driver?
I was for a while. The guys I worked with, but that was the biggest thing for me. And, I was able to put 18 months together, and eventually I was doing school and work full time, and I needed that extra boost, and I was prescribed Adderall as a kid growing up. In high school I was, and so I went to a doctor to get a prescription again. And if you're like me, and if you're like Peter, we can't put any kind of mind-altering substances in our body, even if it's from a doctor, if you're a real alcoholic. And started taking those again. Eventually I went back out for another 3 months, and I was able to get clean, and I was able to go through the 12 steps, and my life was changing for the better. And I met Bill and Ann Schneider, and they gave me an opportunity to come work at the Last Resort really early on, right when they opened, and I only had 90 days sober. But they saw that I was doing whatever it took, and they let me live on property, and I took the 3 to 11 shift, and I drove them into meetings at night into Austin, and I was kind of, I held them accountable, and I did what a tech does, but, I was a really part of that first group because I was living out there, and so the last resort literally saved my life, and I'm forever grateful, and I believe it's the best in the country just because of what it did for myself, so.
Well, so if folks find themselves listening to the show and they themselves are a loved one and they happen to be a fella, first of all, you have to be a fella, find themselves in that sort of addiction cycle or kind of thinking where, just like Austin said, where you originally, you think you can do it and then all of a sudden you can't, you can reach out to these folks. They have a website, they're easy to find and they're very accessible, and they take a lot of, most insurance companies you work with, all the big ones, am I correct?
Yeah, correct. We're in network with Blue Cross, Magellan, so we could do Blue Cross HMOs, and we're in network with Humana, and then we work with all other private insurance companies, United, Aetna.
So people shouldn't think, well, I can't afford a private rehab. That's just for folks in Hollywood. You guys are accessible, available. Try to be as affordable as possible because you want to help as many folks in the community as possible.
So our program is not free, but at the same time, we're not going to bankrupt somebody. That's not our goal. There are a lot of facilities out there that are quite expensive. We're just not one of them. Our goal is to keep it affordable for folks. And if there is a female out there that's struggling, she can call us as well, and we'll help her.
You'll help her get directed to the right location.
Absolutely.
I think there's just so many options out there, and you're seeing it recently in the news, especially with Google, and like they're cracking down on the way people advertise and market treatment centers because what's going on in California, what's going on in South Florida, and the fraudulent billing and the fraudulent drug testing, and a lot of people, unfortunately, just like any other business, they get into it for the wrong reasons. They see the dollar signs and they're exploiting vulnerable parents and vulnerable kids.
Well, what I want to talk to you about is that at your facility, do you do drug testing?
Peter can touch on that.
So we drug test a client one time when they get in.
Okay,
And
so you
then-
kind of know what they're
Correct.
into.
And then if needed, so if there's any
if it's court required or what
court
have you.
required or the doctor needs levels to be able to monitor that person closely, we also don't charge for any of our drug tests. So the addiction industry has been fraught with fraud for quite some years, and drug testing is part of that.
And I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I'd like to discuss that as a little side subject.
Sure.
But as far as if somebody comes in and they're addicted to heroin, and there's no doubt they're addicted to heroin,
Yes,
and a typical addiction for heroin or treatment you might give them OxyContin or you might give them Suboxone if you are not your facility. Am I correct? That may be a way to wean them off that.
Well, so yeah, I mean, medically assisted treatment now is where they put people on Suboxone or Subutex or something to that effect, and they keep that person on it indefinitely. It's a maintenance drug.
Right.
So it's replacing one drug with another. Person could be on it for the rest of their lives. The withdrawals from Suboxone are actually worse than the withdrawals from heroin or OxyContin. So we do not do that at our facility. We will detox a person from whatever substance they're using, but we will not put them on maintenance drugs. No, ma'am.
So that's what I'm saying. So somebody shows up, they're addicted to some drugs. It's clear they're addicted and they need to detox.
Yep.
And you have at your facility you have doctors on staff.
We do. We have 24-hour nursing. We have doctors on staff.
So if somebody's detoxing, you have resources that will make sure that they do it safely. I mean, it's going to be unpleasant and uncomfortable most likely, but
Yeah, so
you'll make sure they end up okay on the other side.
It's first things first is it's safe, medically monitored. Is it going to be extremely comfortable? No, but at the same time, it shouldn't be. They used to do this thing called rapid detox, where they would knock a person out and detox their system completely in 24 hours. Those folks have the highest rate of relapse and overdose in the country. It's outlawed in most states now. The person who's going through withdrawals doesn't need to suffer, but at the same time, they do need to be able to listen to their body and kind of understand what's happening, and have that with them as they move forward in the process of recovery.
So I have a client that has a Xanax addiction.
Sure.
And he has a Xanax abuse and addiction, and every time he takes Xanax and abuses Xanax, he has because unfortunately his lawyer's too good.
Sure.
But unfortunately, what happens is as he's detoxing, he will often dislocate his arm.
Yeah.
So he'll dislocate his body as he's detoxing. Is that something you experience?
Well, I would hope that as he's detoxing at a medical
It's
facility.
at a medical facility. Yeah, he
Yeah,
seems to go to the same urgent care place?
So Xanax is in the benzodiazepine family, same as Klonopin, and so you can die from withdrawals from benzodiazepines, same as alcohol, and so sometimes folks will have seizures, depending upon how severe their withdrawal is. Sometimes they can dislocate, joints or things of that nature. We have not experienced that at our facility. Our doctor is kind of monitoring them and making sure that if he's having violent seizures where he's dislocating parts of his body, it may not be the correct procedure, the correct detox procedure that's happening. That should not happen normally.
I haven't heard of that before, this young man.
No.
But we do need to take a break to hear from our sponsors. But when we come back, I do want to touch on the drug testing industry and how you guys feel about it. And from a legal perspective, kind of some of the battles as defense attorneys we're dealing with drug testing facilities and clients that are ordered to be drug tested. You're listening to Justice is Blonde on Lone Star Community Radio.
Relax with a cup of joe or your favorite drink for the Conroe Lake Conroe Chamber of Commerce Chamber Chat. The show airs on the first Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. on Lone Star Community Radio. Join hosts Courtney Galley and Brian Bondi as they chat about the Chamber's events and programs for the month and invite Chamber members into the studio to talk about their upcoming events and businesses. Learn about your Chamber with Chamber Chat every first Tuesday at 11 a.m.
A Lone Star Community Radio is looking for those who are interested in hosting their own talk show, with monthly and weekly slots available on Conroe's FM 104.5, 106.1, and on irlonestar.com. Start your own podcast, create your first YouTube channel, and be on TV. Contact Lone Star Community Radio online at irlonestar.com or call the station message line at 936-647-3776 to take your first step into the radio world.
This is Andrea Kolsky, and you're listening to Justice is Blonde on Lone Star Community Radio. And today we're super excited to be joined by Peter Pirano and Austin Berry from the Last Resort Recovery in Austin. They are heavily involved, very excited to help with folks that are addicts, need treatment as their last resort. And they specifically really specialize in men with opiate issues and basically anybody that is at their wit's end, either legally, emotionally, from a family perspective. Maybe they have gone through all their resources and they end up where they really do decide it's time to get help, or maybe the court tells them you need to get help or you're going to go to jail. So that's one of these great things that these folks can offer in Smithville. And before the break, we were talking about, kind of the opiate crisis and some of the ways to detox and recover, and they have folks and staff there. But I did want to talk about drug testing, because I have recently, in Montgomery County, there is now a drug testing procedure where people have to call in every day. And when they call in, if their ticket is up, they have to go do a drug test. And the drug test winner of the bid from the probation department is the one who gives you the cheapest price and offer. And I'm compiling a list of people that have gone to jail or had a warrant for their arrest because of a drug test that was essentially false. And we all know that there's ways to alter drug tests. People can bring their own urine, and there's all kinds of other issues that can happen. In fact, we did have somebody that tested positive after he brought in a friend's urine because the friend's urine was positive, and that's his own fault.
That's awesome.
But
I want to meet that guy.
or his friend who's not that bright. But in all seriousness, you have these facilities and you trust in them to at least give you a good sample, and you have people going to jail for false drug tests when they're doing the right thing and they're at the last resort or what have you. What do you think about that? Have you experienced that?
Yeah. So, look, drug tests can give you false positive all the time. And so if you have normal procedure in ethical practices, if a client, you test that client and they test positive for, let's say, marijuana, and you go to him and you say, Johnny, you're positive for marijuana, and Johnny's like, yeah, that's impossible.
Right.
The ethical thing to do would be send that off for a confirmation to a
Right.
confirmation lab, a separate lab, who would
Okay.
then confirm the results and make sure that they're accurate. Because oftentimes, one drug test can have, if it's a dip cup, can just have a bad adulterant in it. And so that's typically how it's done. The issue is that sometimes that can get expensive.
So let me ask you that. I think that could be a great suggestion for some of these courts and judges, is when you have somebody that comes in and says, absolutely not. I mean, I had it happen recently with a young lady that has an opiate problem, and
Sure.
she tested positive for meth, and she's absolutely I've never done meth. I'm like, you want to pass a polygraph? Do you want to do these other things? How do we show? And we ended up doing a hair follicle, which showed no meth. But I think certainly when you have the student regrading their own homework,
Yeah.
or then you're in a situation where, if you don't send it off to a different lab, there's no checks and balances. They're going to say, oh, what did we say it was? That's what it was.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, and it kind of goes both ways. Sometimes you have people who test negative, who you know they've been using drugs.
Right.
So it can work twofold.
So do you think we should outlaw drug testing altogether, or what do you think we should do? What's the answer?
I think, like anything, there's an ethical way to do it, and there's a proper way to do it. I think that all facilities should be held to certain standards and practices, and there should also be restrictions on how much each facility can charge, so there's less incentive to recoup more profit from drug testing. That's my personal opinion.
And so basically, if you are in a situation where you have a legal fake test or a legal, you're on drug court or something like that, where we have a great program here, we have to drug test every day, and you have, let's pretend you're the judge, and you have somebody say, I absolutely didn't use, and they have a system where they have to rely on the drug test. I mean, how do we change that? Do we just say we really, really believe people?
No.
We decide we're just going to believe people? That's not
No, there's an old saying that goes that says, an addict is only lying when their lips are moving, which is,
My ex-husband
Sure.
would also have that issue.
So that can add to some stigma, but the truth, what the message that they're trying to get across is that we oftentimes cannot take an addicted person at their word. So if I was the judge, I would order a confirmation test pretty quickly. And I would also give them consequences. I would say, look, you showed up positive. I'm going to send a confirmation test. You can either tell me now if you did it, and if we'll allow you to kind of wipe the slate clean, minimum consequences. If I get the confirmation test and it turns out that you've used and you've wasted my time, I'm tripling the sentence.
Basically, you double or triple the consequence.
Whatever the legal, whatever I could do legally is what I would do.
Well, we really appreciate you guys hiking all the way down here from Smithville, Texas, to educate the folks in Conroe about your great rehab facility, The Last Resort. And I didn't want to end the show without kind of giving our hearts and shout out to the families and folks that are affected in Parkland, Florida, after the terrible mass shooting. I mean, obviously, as a legal show, you have to cover all legal issues, and we certainly, as a community, feel terrible for anybody that would end up in a situation where they were essentially executed when they went to school. It's absolutely terrifying, and certainly a topic that we can discuss on a later show is, our Second Amendment rights, our Second Amendment being under siege, and what we can do about that. But today we are very happy and pro-recovery and looking towards a very bright future with the gentleman from The Last Resort Recovery in Austin East. You're listening to Justice is Blonde.
I gained about 7